Good morning, everybody. Well, if I have to describe myself, which is a little bit difficult because we look at other people and then we forget how we are perceived. But I would like to be perceived as a passionate art lecturer I've got about 10 years experience in higher education. I was before that a teacher, art teacher at different schools. And I was also working as a television graphic designer for a broadcasting, the National Broadcasting Association. So, with the graphic experience and the educational experience, and then I was also very involved with my own art school at some point, where I was teaching little ones, school students, getting them ready with their portfolios, and also adults that I was teaching at night. So that was happening before the 10 years before I started joining the higher education or the university as such. Right, so my track record, basically, I would say that I like to be seen as innovative. And I also like to be seen as somebody that's that's using and utilizing arts in relation to the context. So the innovative awards that I've won before in teaching was about animation and the use of animation in teaching strategies. So how do you incorporate, even if it's pictures, but incorporate technology and stories into art-based research and also into teaching. And then with the other innovative award that the university sort of have, it's awards that they've got yearly, I focus there more on my own living educational theory, which I will call the PART theory. PART standing for participatory action, participating action research, but it stands for participatory artist, researcher, and teacher. So the students that are familiar with the art theory, I took it a little bit further and added the P to it, making it more comprehensive, making it more engaged and more involved. So I am currently also at the university lecturing, researching, and also trying to organize our, our school or our subject group so that we have specific vision for what we want to accomplish in our school and institution.
Yeah, hello, and thanks for having us here. I hope that I can contribute to this whole wonderful program that you're instigating. Yeah, my name is Linda Hesse. I studied fine art at the University of Pretoria and majored in sculpture, and that was many, many years ago. And since then, I have been, after that, I taught at all levels, at schools from primary till post-matric level for 7 years. And then I did my master's, also specializing in sculpture at the University of the Witwatersrand. And then since then, I had worked for 20 years at the Vaal University of Technology teaching fine art, also mostly theory, drawing, and sculpture. And then at the beginning of 2020, right before lockdown, I started working here at the Northwest University and in art education, which is something that really, really feels very close to me, as that is what I do. I embody that. So my research focus lies in practice, creating projects, really, practice-led projects in the visual arts. So it's the kind of scaffolding of content, and then also a very large part, the making, the critical thinking that leads to critical making. So that's a focus that I feel very strongly about as well. So yeah, I don't know if there's anything else that you'd like me to add.
I mean, you can see I'm European, but I am also situated in a country in the southern part of Africa, South Africa. And it's a country that is weaved with all sorts of contexts and histories and so on. But I think I feel myself very much sort of belonging to the global South and also to South Africa specifically, mainly because I identify with the ideals, I identify with the art, I identify with the craft, I identify with the creativity that you find with the global South. There is an element of unpredictability, there is an element of adventure, but there's also an element of taking it a step further, you know, and embracing context and things around you. So, yeah, it is a line that we can philosophize about. Does the global South, to what do they speak? Do they speak uh, to the psyche of the people, or do they speak to the history or to the context? And I think it is interesting to unpack the term, especially to reposition yourself. How do you stand as a almost as a European that's been born in South Africa, bred here, forefathers and everything? How do we associate and how do we find ourselves belonging to an area that we call the global South? Okay. Which means that we need to look at our customs, we need to look at the art, we need to look at things that we find alienating to our society. We also need to look at uh, it can be very politicized, but I would say the social context is very important, and what has been achieved in the global South up to this point. So we look at the past, but I think what is important is that we also value what we have here and reappreciate um, the originality and the heritage that is embedded in the global South countries. I think we do it too little. You know, there's needs to be a lot more appreciation for what the world is that we identify ourselves with, and you know what perspectives needs to be incorporated. So it's a very wide term, but in brief, I would say it is something that is captured in belonging and in what context, and why do we belong in that context, you know, with what qualities do we identify with, if we can unpack it in that way.
Do I feel I belong to the global South? I I do, yes, because this is where I am situated, and where it's a place where I feel comfortable in, and sometimes very uncomfortable in. So from my own cultural background, I don't really belong anywhere. I come from a very mixed cultural background, um, of which there is probably, no, there's nothing Afrikaans and nothing African. But yet, you know, I'm situated here with absolute love. I do want to refer, though, to the fact that because I'm a hybrid person, and I think a large part of this global South is a hybridization of people and customs. So there's no one direction, one way, one culture of doing things or being things. So I find this being a hybrid myself, and maybe looking at the situation from the point of view of having multiple cultures, multiple identities that merge, and something new and something interesting comes from that, and understanding comes from that. And in that case, I speak from my experience of teaching at the Vaal University of Technology, where I had, I think, 98% of my students were African students, and the things that I learned about African cultures and customs and ways of making, I think, are very different to the Western ways of teaching, of making, of doing things, of understanding things. And I think it's very important to listen to those, to other stories, other methods of making, other ways of thinking. Otherwise, there will be these parallel trains that move somewhere, but they don't come together, I think. So I do also believe, in terms of the Global South, that our curriculum in art education, of what we're teaching at school level, not at higher education level, it needs to change. It's not inclusive enough of art education and the arts within the Global South. I think it's very much based on methods of research, methods of looking that are westernized, and in other words, perhaps more northern and not necessarily southern. So I do think that the change needs to be implemented, and I also do need to, and part of that change is that our Western notions of making art and what role art plays in societies need to be, look, it shouldn't be done in the West from a Western viewpoint. We should really teach from a more Southern viewpoint, which will take some change.
Correct.
I actually have a situation now in my classroom. I have some of my intermediate phase learners here, are students in the classroom, and they were talking about, they made a little booklet of creating their own art pigments, and they had to make a little book of them. And the student was saying, yeah, my book looks like a dompas. And you know, dompas in the South African context is, from apartheid times, the passport or the ID document that Black people had to carry with them in order to be able to live in this country legally, so to say. And also he said, but it's also a bit like the African Zionist church, and I said tithing booklet, and he's like, where do you know about this? And then we started talking about African religions and apartheid, and it was such an interesting conversation. You know, and the thing that I knew something about it was it was a barrier breaker to a certain degree. It was very nice. Mm-hmm. And I think that needs to happen.
I think Linda touched on those. I don't know if she wants to elaborate a little bit, and then because Linda is also very focused on the making process, and maybe how people or students, for instance, differ in the way that they approach and make things. So just to keep the line of thought, whereas I want to take my students, for instance, outside of the classroom, making them more socially engaged and aware of the context, you know, because we have 11 different languages in South Africa, even more official languages, and people are growing up still in a specific culture, and they need to become more aware of the other cultures. So I think it's important the way that Linda is basically embodying certain values and certain making processes in the classroom, whereas I'm moving out of the classroom and see what sort of values and social engagement can happen in different contexts that are foreign, that are like a little bit out of students' comfort zones. So, yeah, I think, Linda, would you like to just talk a little bit about your approach then, and about what is valuable in terms of that, what you just mentioned?
I think from my side, what I was thinking about, the first thing that came to mind, and this is no particular order, is sustainability. Because of the economic differences, the huge socio-economic differences in this country. And literally I heard on the radio this morning that 35 people in this country own most of the money, literally. So the rich are super rich, and the majority are just getting poorer by the day. So you cannot expect your learners to have ideal situations to make art in. You have to have a sustainable practice that is possible in any socioeconomic situation. And I think a lot of art education in our region, I've noticed, gets pushed to the side because you think you have to have this in place, you have to have a small class, you have to have paper, pencils, you have to have all these things in place, logistics in place in order to make art, which is not necessarily so. So I think sustainability, in terms of resources, using resources is very important. I sort of on the top of my head, I just thought about also, I'll mention that later. Then I also think that the importance of art within particular communities and what roles art play in communities is also a very important dimension. So I cannot go into a certain community and expect them to make art about Picasso or something, and they're just looking at me as if I'm talking rubbish. So it has to be relevant within the community. And I think this links up to what Merna is also saying. So you don't create art without the community. And then general aspects that I think are important is that the art classroom, in my case, becomes a space where everybody can innovate, can create, can fail, can make something. And I mean, I had this surprising experience in this classroom where many of the students came to me and said, we didn't know, A, how much fun this is, and B, how relaxing this is. And we will definitely do this in our classrooms because we always just talk and talk and talk and talk. And this brings me to my latest point, is that the art classroom generally, I think, is a space of being extremely human and all the qualities that make us human, our playfulness, our innovative thinking, our creativity, our sense of community, our storytelling, narratives, etc., are all allowed to blossom or flourish in the art classroom, whereas very often in other classrooms, you literally just sit there and you have this flood of words, text come over you, and literally you are becoming a little computer that has to just follow instructions and spit out what has been given to you. Whereas the arts allows for a myriad of interpretations that are all allowed to a certain degree. So I think that is a really important space to be in, and especially in this country where we have this difference in education, where in larger schools from very poor areas, the learners literally just sit all day and listen to a teacher talking to them, and they're not allowed to be and to make. It's a traditional form of education that also does need to change. So sustainability, I think the role of art within certain communities, and then that the art classroom is a space to be human in.
Yeah.
You probably know all these things.
Yeah. I don't know if Teresa wants to say anything, but if I could just add on to this, because I think in a way, and I hope that we complement each other in our teaching and learning practices. When Linda mentions the role that art plays in society is actually very important. And I think in the global south specifically, because the people in different cultures are actually very creative, and they are very original, and they are very innovative in what they do, but they need to be sort of uncovered. And I would say that for me, it is important to rediscover our heritage. What is really available? What is there? Instead of focusing on just the things that we've got that's in our immediate environment and our immediate classrooms and so on, but also in the areas, to go out and really be interested in people that live in the areas. Because I think what is happening is that certain art forms will die. Pottery, for instance, or other art forms, if we don't keep it alive and if we don't treasure the artists and the legends that have been living in the past and get their information and make sure that the youth are also appreciative of the art forms that have been created. With that, saying that, I also think that we need to find a way we look backwards but also forward. So linking technology, virtual galleries and so on with the items and artifacts that we've got in our community to make sure that people become more aware of what is happening in the community and what artists have done in the past. I think we need to move away also from the idea that the global south can create art that is basically just there for curio pieces, to be appreciated by the tourists, um, and become more, look at the crafts and the heritage in the area, and also um, the different art methods that's being used, and try to explore that more. An example that I can give that was actually used at a conference by one of my students with a socially engaged project was when he visited two legendary artists in the area, and they actually came to the gallery as well. So the one was focused, the one artist, Manchu, focused on Cubism. He was very, very good in Cubism. And the lady, Carol Ferry, he focuses on rock art and symbolic type of art. And it was very interesting when this student actually presented a workshop with artists that overlap with their cultures. The one was focused on abstract art and on cubism and so on. And he was from a remote area, and the other artist was living with the rock, with the Bushmen. She was also basically creating work in an abstract way, the way that the people or indigenous people in those times created their work. So she took on the methods she learned from many, many years ago, thousands of years ago, that actually showed it to her how to approach abstract works and so on. So I would say if we look at what value can we add is to start to really look at the past, look at what we've got, the legends, the legendary work, the artist work, and try to bring that also into our teaching and learning. Also looking at the crafts that's being created, but also try to modernize, try to make it accessible for other people with things like virtual galleries, with things like exhibitions and an awareness. Yeah, and then also there are very sort of, I would say, almost avant-garde type of work that was exhibited at our gallery on campus, where they explore the word soil and what soil and rootedness means to people. Even if it is the soil from a small shack that people are living in, or the soil that the ancestors have been buried in, or the soil where you build a new house, or how can you use soil to make art. So I think there should be a more humane type of approach of feeling the tactility of the past, making it transferable to the youth for, to appreciate, and so that things don't disappear, get lost, or buried in the past. And also to use what we've got now. We can't undo technology. We can't actually undo the new world, or the world that we want to see. So how do we link the two different worlds in order to make sure that art plays a role in the past and in the future and in the present, and also to sustain art, not only economically but also as a preservation, as part of our heritage. So I think there needs to be a reappreciation of what we have and how can we take it further? How can we actually expose that a little bit more, make it more relevant, and make it more transferable to the youth? That is actually very important. If I can just link to the previous um, uh, excerpt, or my previous reference to heritage and so on. Look, there's quite a few examples that I can mention of socially engaged art and posters that students have made about recognizing the need in community, then use art-based methods um, to change and to participate and engage with a situation. During the COVID times, students could not socialize, they could not actually start up activities where they were sort of involved with other people. They had to do it remotely, or they had to make a specific time and have their masks and everything like that. So, in that context, I was really amazed about the projects that students came up with. It um, referred to the heritage of the forefathers, of tombstones on a farm that they had to renovate, and that they start cleaning up. They started to look at the well-being of the workers on the farm, for instance, and how to, through art-based methods, create a better environment for them. Okay, there were an excellent socially engaged project that one of the students said that all the mothers were a bit fed up with what to do with the kids, and they start under 5 years a type of a group with different activities and different art-based methods to involve the kids, so that mothers can also take a break, or that they can teach each other, and they can actually involve the smaller kids. There were school kids that were had all these heaped up feelings of aggression, being isolated and not being able to express themselves. So art-based methods were used in a context outside of the classroom, and where they could actually um, start to talk about their feelings. They had to make something where they had to cross the different genders. For instance, some girls had to weld and some boys had to weave. So those were interesting projects that students worked on, and that was actually coming from them and taking it from the areas where they were living, a socially engaged art-based project. But I think the one that was also that stood out that we used in a previous conference, and I can also give you the link to the specific SACIA conference, was taking the legends in a community like Manchu and Furi, and bringing them in a workshop, the work filming what they do and how they create art in an abstract way, in a symbolic abstract way, and so on. And then uh, using that information and presenting workshops where students that were not necessarily art students could start to explore the symbolism in their own lives. And it was very surprising, but also not so surprising, but more eye opener to see that the youth sort of cannot think. They struggle to think symbolically. They struggle to think metaphorically. You know, it's something that needs to be visible, something that needs to be seen, something that needs to be in front of them. And that was a very, if I can call it, not only useful but also aesthetically uplifting workshop where they were actually taught and shown or demonstrated to them how to use symbols in a way that makes them also think about the symbolic or metaphoric level, on a different level. That's what I've learned now from the past. So I would say that the discovery of the unique knowledge, and that they could actually use their own symbolism and apply it then in something else that they wanted to make. But yeah, I think it is that awareness of what makes you special. Are you going to fall into the trap of becoming totally westernized, totally Americanized, totally, different, if we have to call it that way? Or is there something that you can take from this and contain it within yourself, just by looking at what has been created before from the indigenous people?
I think at the moment is there's a project called the Imbali Visual Literacy Program, or a program that's partly sponsored, I think, by MTN, and they go around giving workshops to teachers in remote areas in this country, so arts-related workshops. And I find their work really inspiring, how they go into communities and work with schools and teachers that also have had no experience in creating art, but still have to teach it, and then helping them to learn about different methods of making, topics as well, and methodologies. So I think that's very interesting. Yeah, I find, yeah, that's all I can contribute at this stage. I think that to connect would be a good suggestion. It would be really great to connect with other art educators in tertiary institutions, especially from my side, to communicate. And I don't mean like not on a formal platform, even just like an Instagram platform where you share ideas, you follow each other and comment on each other, and it's really supportive in that sense. Also, sharing in that way brings about creative ideas and making creative connections. We are not alone in that sense, so that to make those connections with each other would be great. Also, sharing of projects, I think that would be great. I recently had a virtual artist studio visit with my students, and the artist was, we had a Zoom session, and it was really, the artist walked us through the studio and talked about methods of making, about art education, her ideas around arts education as well. And it really opened up the world in a way to many of the students. And I think it would be great if we could have that kind of connection as well. So invite another art educator or another art class even into our art class, and ask questions and share projects or ideas. It doesn't have to be, for my side, I don't really want it to be too formalized. If it's kind of spontaneous, it's more, use the word before, human. And yeah, that's what I think.
Yeah. Okay. And I fully agree with Linda. I think it is so important because, artists, sort of almost the characteristic or the stereotypical image that relates to an artist, it's an isolated person behind the easel, or a person working by themselves and, sort of like being by themselves all the time and creating by themselves. And I think that a collaborative type of creation, finding your own solace or your own niche, even amongst other people, is very important. I've seen how people working, for instance, the students on posters, where they work together on posters, how they instigate each other, or inspire each other with creativity. So I think we need to, the global south is actually a very communal type of community, if you think about it, society. And people need to work together. People need to make time to get together and focus on your own sort of skills and so on, but just in a space where you feel safe, but also where you feel um, you can get some advice, or you can, share some knowledge, or you can share some creativity or methods or things that you learned. Um, yeah, I just remember I once belonged to a watercolor society, and we used to make definite times to paint together, and it was so nice, to work by yourself, but you also work in an environment where people are struggling almost with the same issues or the same methods or the same techniques, but they express themselves, of course, in a different way. So I think that is very important, to start to revisit or rediscover our artistic communities in our area and to start working together again. I also think that we should not limit art just to sort of the fine art aspect. Art methods are so important in all the disciplines, in all the subjects, and basically in life. So we should explore our crafty side. We should explore our DIY side. We should actually include arts-based methods in things that can change um, the status quo. If there's sensitive issues to be discussed, people have different forms of art therapy. I mean, we attended a strategic meeting where they make use of laugh therapy, for instance. But it is important that we have that sense of fun, of joy, of belonging, of communal engagement. And yeah, uh, the other valuable advice that I would give is to really start to reach out again. We've been isolated for a long time, and to look at the world of art around us in our communities, our heritage, the indigenous knowledge that we can start to reappreciate and start to incorporate that again and make it part of the world that we're living in, become less isolated than before.